Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. And today I'm excited to have a discussion about our healthcare system and how it's being affected by the elites at the top of the medical establishment. I'm here today with Dr. Marty Makary. I'm sure you'll recognize him. You see him many times on television, particularly as a Fox News medical consultant. And he has a new book coming out on September the 10th called Blind Spots: When Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Your Health. And this book really talks about all of the misinformation that has led to so much distrust of the medical system. Marty is the chief of islet transplant surgery at Johns Hopkins, where I spent my entire medical career. He's a renowned public health researcher and a New York Times best-selling author. In 2020, he was the recipient of the Business Book of the Year award for his book, The Price We Pay. And we're excited to talk to him about his new book, which is probably going to be another bestseller. Thank you, Marty, for coming on the program, and welcome.
Great to see you, Ben. We miss you at Hopkins.
Indeed. Now, as a prominent figure in healthcare, and you've been there for over 20 years now, what do you see as the greatest threat to the healthcare system today?
Well, central planning doesn't work well in government, and it turns out it doesn't work well in medicine either. When we've got central planners in science telling us from on high that their opinion is absolute scientific evidence with an intense vigor of absolutism, they're going to, it's going to result in a lot of mistrust. So I think we need to restore scientific discourse in medicine. In the past, they could control dissent by shutting down researchers. They had the gates of the New England Journal and the academic ivory towers. But today, we can't be silenced. We're speaking directly to the public. We're going on social media. These are respected scientists, and people are realizing that what they're told is not always the full story.
Well, that was very apparent during the whole COVID pandemic, when many highly respected clinicians were shut down. They tried to put the kibosh on them because they weren't following the recommendations of the establishment elites. And you were very vocal, and we appreciated having your voice out there.
Thank you.
But I want to ask you about healthcare costs today. It's very high. We spend $13,100 per capita per year in this country on healthcare. That's a lot of money. Most concierge practices are only $5,000 to $10,000. So where the heck is all that money going? And is this a solvable problem?
Well, every now and then I'll meet with a politician who wants a fresh idea on healthcare. And I'll start off by saying, what are your goals? And they'll give me all the fantasy ideas, everything that everybody wants. I don't think anyone wants an American to suffer because they made a bad decision. But we're already spending half of all federal spending on healthcare. If we're going to have a better healthcare system, we have two choices. Dial up the spending until it's consumes the entire federal expenditure, or we can cut the waste. And so much of our healthcare system is middleman waste. It is focusing on the wrong problems, and lots of people are getting rich as the American public is getting sicker. We have the most medicated population in the history of the world. In some cases, it's the medicalization of ordinary life.
Right.
We're seeing a generation of doctors now, and I'm seeing it in some of our students at Hopkins, and I wish you were still at Hopkins to be able to teach them as you did. But these students don't want to have anything to do with this broken system of just seeing people in quick visits and billing and coding. That's not medicine. Just trying to get an NIH grant for these small, little, tiny research incremental discoveries without asking the big questions It's broken. People don't want to be a part of it. Maybe we need to talk about treating diabetes with cooking classes
All right.
instead of just throwing insulin at people. Maybe we need to treat high blood pressure by looking at the quality of someone's sleep and the stress in their life. Maybe we need to treat more back pain with ice and physical therapy instead of just surgery and opioids. We have this incredible over medicated generation, and we hear from the doctors groups that more kids need to go on Ozempic. Okay, maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs and
Yeah,
food as medicine and general body inflammation. So I'm optimistic right now. There's a movement in medicine to reject the status quo broken system and redesign it and start from scratch.
that's interesting. You know, one of the things I remember as a first year medical student is they talked about the fact that there were two groups of people, Mormons and Seventh day Adventists, that lived 7 to 10 years longer than everybody else. And the point they were making is that lifestyle does matter. Uh, what you eat, when you sleep, exercise, all these things actually do have an impact. And maybe we don't spend enough time talking about those things anymore. But do you think that the distrust that people have for the medical system now was engendered by the way we handled COVID, or was it there before that?
I think there was some suspicion before that because COVID was a peek into how the medical establishment works. And during COVID, it was in clear view for everybody to see. They saw noncompliance to many ideas of theirs that were opinions, they were not scientifically based. And then they clamped down. They really, started to get angry with people. And as you know from your distinguished career as a doctor, you're not supposed to get angry with your patients and alienate them. You're not supposed to become hostile with your patients. You're supposed to be understanding and listen to patients. So people realize they've been lied to over and over again during COVID about boosters in young, healthy teenagers, about natural immunity, about masking toddlers, about schools having to be shut down for nearly 2 years. They realize they've been lied to over and over again. But if you look at the track record of modern medicine, it wasn't just COVID. They got peanut allergies wrong for 15 years, giving the wrong advice that ignited our modern day peanut allergy epidemic. They got the opioid problem wrong for 30 years, saying it was non addictive. That was their dogma. They got food wrong and the food pyramid from the government wrong for 60 years. They got hormone replacement therapy and menopause wrong. We still get it wrong now. It's 22
Uh,
years in. So it's not just a one off. People need to recognize that when we as a medical profession use good scientific evidence, we shine, we help a lot of people. But when we go with the opinion and gut feeling of a few elites at the top, we have a terrible track record.
Practically speaking, how do we get that trust back? I mean, it sounds nice to say we need to do it, but how do we actually do it? Because the system is still in place.
And the same people are in place, in many cases. I think from my experience with patients, if you are totally honest, forthcoming, acknowledge a mistake, and show humility, people can be very forgiving. But we haven't seen any of that. There's been no humility. There's been no recognition. It's been this modern day colonialism where a ruling class is basically imposing ideas on the rest of the country. I mean, the idea of just giving kids an iPad for 2 years and having them do classes on the iPad may sound fine in Bethesda, Maryland, where they are going to their country clubs and their kids have private tutors. But in inner city Baltimore, an area you know very well from your time at Johns Hopkins, you can't just give kids an iPad for 2 years. It didn't work. There were kids who never logged on and never showed up in school again.
Right.
So we need to see an apology and some humility.
Absolutely. Now, you talk about the blind spots, which you identify in your book. When in your career did you first become aware of all these blind spots?
Well, it's funny because I think as a young student, you see them, but then you kind of shelf the ideas a little bit. You see these great ironies, How is it that we had 2 hours of nutrition in medical school? And quite honestly, it might have been better to have zero since they were wrong. That was
Wrong.
misinformation. So you see these great ironies. How is it we're not dealing with the underlying problems? We're treating depression, but we're not addressing loneliness in society. And we don't talk about frailty. We don't talk about environmental exposures that cause cancer, only the chemotherapy to treat it. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, which, as you know, is a coal mine region. They
Yeah.
have a particular type of coal called anthracite coal that burns really clean. And there's a mine fire that has been on fire for decades. And I remember growing up seeing smoke coming out of the ground when my mom would drive us to the mall about 15 minutes away. And I'd say, Mom, why is there smoke coming out of the ground? And she said, oh, that's the Centralia mine fire. It's been on fire for decades and they're never going to put it out. It's going to go on. It was accidentally started. And this mine has been on fire. It's going to burn for hundreds of years. They decided that they can't put it out. And as a kid, I'm just thinking that's a little strange, but I guess maybe everybody has a mine fire near their house. And I just said, okay, thanks, Mom, for explaining that. Well, my dad was a hematologist, blood cancer disorders doctor at Geisinger. And he would tell me about all these rare cases of leukemia that he would see that no one else would see around the country in the numbers he would see. And it was so obvious. I would even ask him, like, Dad, why are you seeing all these rare cases that you talk about? And he says, I believe it's because the mines and the mine fires. But never was there a study, never did the NIH have any curiosity about this. And so you realize we have these things in society, the ultra processed foods, the highly refined carbohydrates, now all these seed oils that consume as many as 20% of the calories of an average American. And these seed oils, when they're denatured, like linoleic acid, they do not even, these are not natural things. So 20% of our calories come from something that does not appear in nature. It's a byproduct of a processed method. And so you realize there are these giant blind spots. And I wrote the book because there are these areas in medicine we are not talking about that we need to talk about.
Right.
We've got to start talking about the microbiome and other areas of health where there's exciting research.
Well, we're going to get to that momentarily, but I'm really thankful that you're doing this because, so many doctors do know that there's stuff going on, but they don't do anything about it. And, which brings me to my next question. Why do you think so many in the medical profession are so prone to herd mentality and just not speaking up?
Well, groupthink is a powerful force, especially when doctors are given nudges to get in line and, just obey. We have this culture of obedience. But science has always been based on challenging deeply held assumptions in the field. And you see in the youngest people who enter the profession that intellectual curiosity that's healthy, the questioning. And they're quickly, basically told in subtle ways, you can ask these interesting questions, but you just need to memorize and regurgitate the Krebs cycle and all the names of these enzymes and all these things. Why are we forcing the rote memorization of all these things you can look up now on the internet? You don't need to know them on demand in the trauma bay. We have a medical education that's entirely broken. So we take these highly creative, altruistic students at a time when they're drawn in. Everyone is drawn to healthcare out of a sense of compassion. It unites everyone at every level in healthcare. We went into it to do something to help people in need who come to us for help. But then we basically do this memorize and regurgitate culture for 4 years. We beat them in residency. Heck, they're wearing scrubs. They almost look like prisoners. And we tell them you need to specialize in some tiny area. If you can focus on one tiny little area, we're going to glorify you. And you and I have done that. We've conquered the sub specialty of medicine and been at the top of our game. But we also need people to look at the whole body, the whole system, how we fund research, how we approve drugs. And so I think we need to get away from this day one of med school. Here's the Netter's anatomy book. Here are all the organs in the body. You pick one for your career and just focus on that one thing. We need Ben Franklin thinkers, Ben Franklin. And there's a lot of these scientists, Benjamin Rush,
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk. These are people who think big, and they're not just hyper focused in one tiny area of science. Their minds are naturally curious, and they think about everything. And that's what we need in medicine. We need a Ben Franklin thinker. Right now, if you're a Ben Franklin thinker, you think about every aspect of medicine. You're told by the NIH, no, you got to focus on one tiny little area, do a little incremental discovery, and we're going to reward that, and that's how you're going to advance your career. Well, when President Trump said recently that we were supposed to get the cure for cancer, and what did we get? Nothing. I mean, there's some real truth to that. We have spent a ton of money on cancer research, and what have we gotten for it? The top paper at ASCO, the big cancer meeting, was showing that one well-known chemo drug that's been around forever for another type of cancer increased survival by a couple months and didn't add to the cure rate at all. I mean,
Right.
if that's our top discovery, our return on investment needs to be reevaluated.
Marty, why is critical research information so often hidden? Is there a profit motive in medicine?
Well, we know with the food system and the food pyramid, the sugar industry was funding a lot of the research, including a professor I had at the Harvard School of Public Health who was part of the demonization of natural fat and ignored the role of sugar. And that moved the entire food industry to refined carbohydrates and ultra processed foods as America got more and more obese. Now, it's not the only cause, but you have to take a step back and ask, could some of our major health crises that we deal with today have actually been caused by or hastened by the hubris of the medical establishment itself? I mean, it essentially created the opioid epidemic with the dogma it's not addictive. It ignited the peanut allergy epidemic, and maybe the obesity epidemic. One of the greatest was ignited by this demonization of natural fat, moving the entire food industry to these highly addictive refined carbohydrates. We live in this scary time in medicine. And it's worse now, I think, and I'd be open to your thoughts here on this, Ben. But more than ever, if some research paper gives a result that somebody likes, they praise it as scientific evidence, even if it's a flawed study. And
Right.
if it gives a result they don't like, then they dismiss it and censor it, even if it has sound methodology.
Well, I'm shocked sometimes when I listen to the news media and the way that they treat this information, because basically they take the things that align with their ideology and they elevate those, and the things that they don't, they depress them. And the same thing about the people who are the advocates of these various things. And it's very difficult for the average citizen to know what to trust and what not to trust. It's a big issue these days, and particularly now that the media has forgotten its role. The media, the press, is the only business protected by the Constitution. There was a reason for that. It's because they're supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the people, so that the will of the people could be the principal mechanism for directing the government. But boy, have we strayed from that in a very, very big way. And it's problematic, and it manifests itself in every aspect of our society, and especially in medicine, as you can see. But are you finding some other doctors other medical professions who are willing to sort of jump in the fray with you here?
I've been so encouraged, not only is a younger generation of doctors who, let's be honest, they have a fairly anti-corporate, anti-establishment, anti the man mindset. Social justice is a generational value. They don't want to get on this hamster wheel that we usher them onto to, bill and code their entire life and get burnt out in the profession. And so they want to start businesses. They want to deliver care without any insurance so they can just do something directly, either a part of the Medicare program or a charity or concierge, or I get employers to pay for a brilliant idea they have to work on helping people with their chronic disease. The hard part of chronic disease is not telling people what to do, it's helping them do it. So I'm encouraged by the young people, and I'm encouraged by an army of doctors that rose up and said, hey, we're with you here. I mean, what you're saying, natural immunity, heck, we've known about that since the Athenian plague of 430 BC.
Exactly. No, I've found that I talked about that very often on television. We've known about natural immunity forever, and now all of a sudden, natural immunity, what's that? Or if you have some, it's only good for 3 weeks. Just incredible stuff that we were hearing. But I want to ask you about this whole peanut allergy epidemic. For our audience, can you explain what this was and how the medical experts got it wrong?
Well, we are one of very few countries in the world that has a peanut allergy epidemic. And that's because 24 years ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics, in their hubris, decided to tell all women, pregnant women, lactating women, and children 0 through 3 years of age to avoid peanuts 100%, peanut products. And the avoidance of peanuts early in life and peanut butter created immune sensitization. The experts missed a giant concept that had been known in the immunology community called immune tolerance. That is kind of the dirt theory. The more you're around these early allergens, the more your body learns to tolerate them, and it prevents allergies. It doesn't, the avoidance doesn't prevent allergies. They got it perfectly backwards.
Completely.
And so we started to see these severe allergies and emergency room visits and kids who would go into anaphylaxis or a reaction just from being near a peanut. This is by and large a man-made problem, still doesn't exist in most parts of the world because for 15 to 17 years, the American Academy of Pediatrics with the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, hand in hand, locked arms and walked off a cliff together, giving us bad information. They could have done the study before they made that recommendation, but instead it ended up getting done 15 years after the recommendation. It was too late. And so we're still reeling back from this, essentially this manufactured crisis.
When they found out that this was the case, it still took the American Academy of Pediatrics 2 years before they reversed their earlier false guidance. Why the heck did it take them so long?
I think this is the pride that you can learn about in psychology or in biblical times. I mean, pride is one of the greatest threats to human progress. Where was the, gosh, we got this wrong, we feel terrible, we want everyone to know that you should introduce a little peanut butter in infancy when a child is 4 months, 5 months, 6 years old, 6 months old, a little bit of eggs, a little milk, being around dogs and cats. It supports immune tolerance and prevents allergies. We didn't see that apology, and I think that's emblematic of the problem in modern medicine. The misinformation lingers when you don't see any humility from those that put it out.
There was another pretty big falsehood, or I guess I could call it a lie, that hormone replacement therapy caused cancer. How in the heck could that kind of information get out and get spread around?
Well, 22 years ago, a doctor at the NIH, someone who is essentially a Dr. Fauci of his day, held a press conference announcing to the world that they had just completed the largest taxpayer study in the history of the world, and that it found that a woman who takes estrogen replacement or estrogen plus progesterone replacement after menopause would get cancer from that estrogen or what we call hormone replacement therapy. But he didn't release the data. And when it came out later, if you look carefully at it, there was no statistically significant increase in the rate of breast cancer.
Mm.
Turns out I did some investigative journalism around this, and some of his co-authors had told him beforehand, you can't put this out there. It's not true. There was a shouting match at this meeting before the announcement. They said if you dangle something as sensitive as breast cancer in front of women and say it's caused by this hormone therapy, that is a genie you will never be able to put back in the bottle. And sure enough, to this day, 80 to 90% of doctors do not prescribe it because they believe it causes breast cancer. Just to give you a little reference, and I know you're familiar with this, but for your listeners, there's probably no medication that improves the health outcomes of a population more than hormone replacement therapy in postmenopausal women, with the exception of arguably antibiotics. You live 3.5 years longer. The rate of heart attacks is cut in half. Cognitive decline goes down by 50 to 60%. One study found the risk of Alzheimer's goes down by 35%. Here we're spending billions of dollars on these drugs that barely work for Alzheimer's, and this solution to replace the body's natural estrogen is right in front of our eyes, and it's not been used. 50 million women have been denied this incredible health benefit because of the dogma of one person that I hope my book can undo and explain to people the root of where it came from.
I sure hope so. But do most doctors, do you think, actually look at these studies? Or are they pretty much like the rest of the population?
Well, I think, gosh, you probably know the doctor type as well as anyone. My take on it, Ben, is that you talk to a doctor who will say, well, according to the American Academy, and they're just reciting some guideline like a catechism. They're not the type that's thinking independently, okay? And then you meet some doc who says, I've heard these different studies. I looked at them. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm torn. Here's what my general wisdom or gut feeling tells me. But there's this, that, and so they're very transparent and honest. So I think you get both types in the medical field.
Well, what recommendation do you have for the decent doctor who sees some of these glaring contradictions, knows that things are wrong, but everybody else is moving in a certain direction? Should he just keep his mouth shut? What should he do?
No, we need those doctors to speak up. We're seeing dogma right now around transgender care as if there's a scientific study to show that it decreases suicide rate. Transgender surgery does not decrease suicide rates in any study. We need people to speak up because the activists are running people out of town when somebody questions some of this dogma. Michael Joyner, the former head associate dean of research at Mayo Clinic, was suspended when he said, hey, women who take testosterone may not be fairly competing in women's sports. So a bunch of us rallied around him. We also have Substack now that just challenges a lot of the deeply held assumptions in medicine and will challenge a lot of the new studies on every topic in medicine. It's called Sensible Medicine. But there's a group of docs now with a big platform, Vinay Prasad, Peter Attia, Casey Means. And I think we're starting to let people know that experts can have different opinions, and that's okay. It's okay to have a civil discourse.
It seems like one of the biggest lies that's been told by the medical establishment for many years is to avoid cholesterol. It's going to make you fat. It's going to do all kinds of. What's the story with that?
Well, it turns out that cholesterol in food is not even absorbed by the body. 90+% of it goes right through your system because, um, sort of from a scientific standpoint, it's esterified. That is, it's connected to a bulky molecule that doesn't enable it to be absorbed. 99% of your body's cholesterol is made by your body, and the vast majority of it is good. It's needed for every cell in the body and hormones and life. So the medical establishment, really led by one guy in the 1960s, Ansel Keys, who was a slick politician and made the rounds and had convinced everybody in the medical oligarchy, hey, we've got to demonize cholesterol and natural fats. And he was very successful. He got the American Heart Association on board, and this dogma ruled for 60 years or so. But the irony is that the cholesterol you eat is not even part of your cholesterol in your blood.
Well, it obviously is not the great culprit with obesity. But what is the great culprit, obesity? You hear people with all kinds of things. I love it when people come to me and they say, I don't really eat very much. I have a gland problem. I say, you probably do. It's a salivary gland. What What do you think is really behind the tremendous epidemic of obesity that's going on?
Well, first of all, I think the right answer in medicine a lot of times, and it's okay to say we don't fully know. And I think that's the honest answer. There are different ideas. I personally subscribe to the concept that refined carbohydrates and ultra processed foods are driving a lot of our obesity epidemic. We've not talked about it. The NIH hasn't been interested in talking about it. It doesn't fall into any one department in the hospital. And so playing whack-a-mole with chronic diseases, nobody's actually looked at what people are eating and the habits of how we eat things. The microbiome is also playing a role. The calories in, calories out doesn't explain why babies, you can have obesity in a newborn baby now. You can actually have babies that are generally heavier. And it probably has something to do with the fact that the bacteria that line our gut, the millions of bacteria that live in a balance we call the microbiome, they're involved in digestion. They produce vitamins and enzymes. They even produce GLP-1 in low doses. So,
And it's not just about bacteria, is it? It's like fungi and
yes,
viruses and all of those little creatures.
yeah, yeah. It's I'm amused, Ben, when I see research studies affirming what we've kind of known from biblical ancient times, that people should eat whole foods, clean meats. There's value to fasting, and meditation is part of good health. I mean, these are not, you see new articles, hey, look at the value of meditation and sleep quality. Well, yeah, these are biblical principles.
No question about it. Well, can you give us a message of hope? What gives you hope that the medical system will actually change for the better and be more trustworthy and bring us prosperity in the future? Or is that a pipe dream?
Now, I am optimistic on the future right now. I do think that the system works, that when you have a society with open civil discourse, people hear different ideas and they realize that it's important to have an open debate on scientific recommendations. People want to know if there's evidence to support something or if it's just the gut feeling of somebody at the top. And I think we're seeing doctors rise up now. I think we're seeing patients ask questions they've never asked before. And that's creating demand in the marketplace for us to have answers. When we encourage patients to ask about the price of their procedure, hospitals over time slowly began changing the way they do their business to say, hey, we got to give them a price. They want a price. We got the price transparency executive order passed by the Trump White House, affirmed by the Biden administration. It was a bipartisan idea. And people said that was never going to happen. It would never happen that hospitals would be required by law to post prices, cash prices for common shoppable services. So I am optimistic. We're seeing people ask about the role of food, and we're seeing doctors now get off the hamster wheel of medicine and work with patients with these point solutions. Employers are paying for healthcare and they're open to fresh new ideas. So
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic.
Well, I think you're a pioneer. You're sort of leading the way for a lot of people in the medical profession to get more active, to get more involved, and to recognize that, we have a responsibility as healthcare professionals to look not only at our individual patients, but at public health and how we can all use the knowledge that we have to improve health of everybody in our society. So thank you for being a voice of reason, for getting out there, for not being afraid, because that is such a big issue. People are just so fearful. But hopefully we'll get to a point where we stop trying to punish people that disagree with us for anything and start working together as united society and recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies, and that if we combine our strengths, it will be synergistic and we will move much further and much faster. You're a perfect example of that. Thank you, and keep it up.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you for your voice. Great to see you again.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Marty McCary for that wonderful, enlightening conversation. And I hope you'll get his new book, Blind Spots. It promises to be an interesting read and will, I think, wake a lot of people up about some of the things that are going on in medicine, why the distrust is there, and how we can start working to turn that around. And that's it for this week. Remember to rate us, review us, make sure you watch us, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Spread the word, because common sense is not common, but we want to make it common once again. And remember the cornerstone principles: faith, liberty, community, and life. We'll see you next week.